We'll start. So welcome everybody to VietSpeak. This is our launch. We'll be launching the group as well as the website, as well as our GoFundMe campaign. So we're recording this event and it will be shared via email. And perhaps we'll have it on our YouTube channel at some point. So I'll just start with the acknowledgement to country. We acknowledge the Bunwurrun and the Woiwurrun language groups of the Kulin Nation, their ancestors, elders, families and communities who are the traditional custodians of the Greater Melbourne, Werribee and the Mornington Peninsula areas. We acknowledge language revitalisation and practices are integral to culture, recognition and reconciliation. Chúng tôi công nhận nhóm ngôn ngữ Bunwurrun và Woiwurrun và dân tộc Kulin, tổ tiên của họ, các tộc trưởng, gia đình và cộng đồng thổ dân. Họ là người giữ gìn lãnh địa truyền thống của vùng đất Melbourne và ngoại vi, Werribee và bán đảo Mornington. Chúng tôi công nhận sự hồi sinh của ngôn ngữ và sử dụng ngôn ngữ đi liền với văn hóa, công nhận và hòa giải. And with that, I'll introduce Dr. Vicky Cousins from the Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages to get us started. Welcome, Vicky.
Thank you. Ngatamali Nyungan, Dr. Vicky Cousins, Kire Warong Gundichmara. Maapanu Wangan Nutung Wanyu Kulun, Woiwurrung ba, Bunwurrung ngalamin, Miring ba Kuraki Napun ba Narakitung, Din Makadaba, Din. Watanan laka wirakanan matong biglaka, matong nyanyan, nyanyan kuyuku, nyanyan pinich, nyanyan kuyaku. Wantakangu wukanan karapitin nyei. Wangatung walich, ma nyi kuya wirakanan miring nyi. Kuyan wirakanan nyamatich ba ma watnanda din miringi. Nyamatich prangwanan nulungtia. Namatich prangwanan nulitya wuro mit napun kurki. Nyamatich prangwangan nanin. Nyamatich prangwanan nyanin. Nyamatich pangchama. Pangchama wangan nuchung nangora. Wirakalit nyan. Wirakalit nyan. Wirakalit nyan. Wuro mit napun kurki nyi. Kalpina miringi, kalpina wanyu miring. Kalpina nalangi, kalpina patatichi. Wirakalit nyan. Wirakalit nyan. Lakanwan matnanda. Lakanwan watnanda. Wangaki wan watnanda. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. None of you probably understood a word I said and what language I'm speaking. You'll probably guess though, because I did introduce where I come from and where my country is, which is Southwest Victoria. And the Gunditjmara is our nation and the Kire Wurrung is my language group. My question is, when I'm usually saying these words, because I'm addressing generally a mainstream audience, and I ask them, how is it that they don't know these things? How do they not know our languages, our Aboriginal languages from Victoria and Australia? And I spoke about how our old people, our elders from long ago, our ancestors and our elders today have been speaking with the white people about our country, our language, our culture, and how it hurts my heart and how it makes me angry as well. And frustrates many of us. So when Hoang invited me, Hoang has worked with my husband in a musical context, and we've had a couple of yarns about language, and my grandson's actually going to Footscray Primary School next year. So Hoang was telling me about his advocacy and wanting to rally the community to stand up for your language and bilingual program. And I'm like, yes, I'm there with you. We support you in that because, language is central to culture. It holds all of your cultural knowledge. It tells you who you're related to, where you're from, who is, what is your place and belonging in your community. So I think that, people, our languages, it's a commonality that we share. And I think we were talking earlier before we came online around how it only takes one generation to lose your language. So Hoang offered me the opportunity to come and speak and share some of our thoughts. And I'm with the Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages, and wanting to offer our support, our moral support, I suppose, in your struggle, in the shared struggles that we have living and working in a colonial context in a colonised country such as Australia, and the Western capitalist paradigm that we all struggle to survive under, particularly in resourcing, which is my other little bugbear I mentioned earlier around resourcing of supportive languages. So the Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages has been operating 26 years this year. It was formed by a group of keen, interested people. Language reclamation in Victoria has been carried out with very little government support over the years for the extent and scope of what is required. And Uncle Sandy Atkinson, a Bangarang elder who's now passed, paid $50 out of his own pocket to register the corporation. So we're an Aboriginal corporation and not-for-profit, and DGR and charitable and all that stuff. Loads of paperwork, which Rosales reminds me of. Rosales Martinez, for those who don't know, has joined us. She's our CEO at VACL and will be available in our Q&A afterwards with myself to answer any questions or comments. I'm on the board of directors. I'm following in my father's footsteps, who was part of the group of the founding members of VACL, and it was set up absolutely to do revitalisation in our language. There's about 3 languages in Victoria that I know of who have a handful or less of fluent speakers. Fluent, I mean being able to communicate fluently in a daily conversational way, not just saying a little speech like I did then or a welcome to country, but are fluent speakers. So the rest of us are language revitalisation. We're working from language that's left in the community, which is mostly words and some phrases, our Aboriginal English, which is structured on our old languages, and historical records. So we're relying on the legacy of our old people who spoke to the non-Aboriginal people who wrote our languages and words and stories down to redream them back into our living contemporary cultural lives. Because the impacts of colonisation are still reverberating, and so I feel very passionately when I get the chance to talk to people about language or talk with other people about their languages, because it is only one generation and you can lose your language, as in you might be able to understand it but you can't speak it, and then your children understand a bit less and they don't speak much, and it's all about expediency and convenience of living and interfacing with the world out there, when I'm sure nobody here wants to be homogenized and become all the same. How boring would that be, and how much would we lose? So there's over 350 plus languages in Australia and 700 dialects broadly speaking. We had 100% language, multilingual language fluency 200 odd years ago, and we're down to 13% across the whole of Australia. The federal government spends $20 million a year on Aboriginal language centres and language programs, which is also shared by art. You can also apply for arts projects with language in them. And they spend $54 million in wine, supporting wine exports. So you would be aware, no doubt, how other cultures are valued, and our cultures are not very highly valued, despite the government eventually signing up in, I think, 2013 to the United Nations Declaration for Indigenous Peoples' Languages. Australia was one of the 4 languages who didn't sign up initially until 2013. Anyway, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this, and VACL's work has been instrumental in being able to support language development. And in the last 5 to 10 years, the demand, because communities can now have the time and able to see the value in their language much more than ever. There's so much work needing to be done, and we receive very little ongoing support from state and federal governments. We get project funded. We all know how projects go. I'm sure you spend half your time reporting and applying, and the other half of the time actually doing the project. So in my work, I won't keep going too much longer because I'm aware of the time, but in my actual role, I've taken on my father's given me the responsibility to be doing language revitalisation in our community. And as I said, that requires, we have to do derivational morphology, for example. What do the words mean? What is the stem words? So whilst the government currently is pushing for Aboriginal languages in schools, there's been no resourcing to do the work. So communities are being pressured and in having to try and deliver resources and things to fulfil education expectations. And I'm not against languages in schools. It's about also languages in communities and families and homes and living again. And learning your Aboriginal language at school does not, there is no evidence to say that you will become a fluent speaker from that growing up. So there's a whole lot more resourcing required. So at the moment, I'm currently focusing on, fortunately, we have no paid language worker positions in Victoria at this point in time in an ongoing basis. Again, it's all project work, and we have a linguist who supports community. But what I'm doing is grammar rebuilding, because this, if you don't have your framework and your grammar, you can't talk properly. We can't be conversational. I can't be fluent. So that's my focus, and to create opportunity for us to become, because everyone is aspirational towards being a fluent speaker. So that's a little bit around what we do at VACL and what we do in our communities. And there are people all over the state fitting in language work between their other community commitments, whether it's a full-time job or going to meetings or being consulted by the government and all those other responsibilities people carry, as well as looking after your family. So thank you, and I really wish you all the best with this advocacy for VietSpeak and keeping your language strong in your communities and schools. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks for sharing your language and your struggle. And I think language and culture that you talk about are inseparable. So by that, I'll segue to our next speaker, An Nguyen Austin, who is a scholar as well as a poet, and she'll perform 2 poems prepared especially for this launch.
Cool.
Over to you, An.
Okay. Thank you, Vicky. I really enjoyed learning about the work, and also I like this word redreaming, so like to pick it up a little bit as well. To start, I'd like to share some footage from when I was rescued at sea.
le sentiment que nous allions assister à un événement
So this is my
extraordinaire.
boat of 101 people escaping Vietnam when I was a child. And as you can see, I remember being how exhausted and terrified of climbing the fishing net because the only able people
Ils sont
were
100
able to
dans
do
ce
it.
bateau de 9,50 m de long. En
And children and older people were left behind.
majorité des femmes et des enfants qui n'en croyaient pas leurs yeux pensent.
So here's the doctor that lifts this 81-year-old man, and that's the doctor in which I had to find in order to get this footage.
Menuisier, un réparateur de cyclopousse et puis
And
des
that's
soudeurs,
me in the
des
picture
boulangers, des
at
paysans,
age 6
des
and
pêcheurs.
7, just about turning 7, and that's a bit of the history of where I'm coming from as a child refugee, and some of the work on researching about child refugees in which I have interviewed Hoang, and that's how I came here today. But I'm a volunteer with VietSpeak, mainly to build and rebuild the bilingual Vietnamese program so that my own son can inherit my mother's tongue.
Mm.
The following poem is an intentionally written in broken Vietnamese and English from the perspective of my first friend in primary school. It's called, "If a child falls like a twig on a landmine in the forest, would you hear her scream? No? The girl in my second grade class picture is not running inflamed with napalm, but they say she's from Vietnam. She's never said a word, so I insist we be friends in silence. I'm a Swede in Texas. We foreigners must stick together. Me no hablo español, she learned to say to the other brown kids who mistook her as a Mexican. Me, I know English. Tôi biết nói tiếng Việt, Anh explains to me. To know, biết. I learned this word from her. To biết something is different than làm, do something about it. We all know that when people speak, nói, we ought to listen, but Vietnamese biết that when Vietnamese speak, no one do, làm, listen. It just sounds like sad rain off a duck's back. By listening, I mean do what is asked to be done, to be understood, recognized as here, present. Years later, en route to Australia, I heard her on Facebook rallying about bilingual Vietnamese education, her voice indignant, the dismissive ding of political apathy resounding. Nghe mà phải làm, listen but must act. We pay taxes. Chúng tôi đóng thuế for schools, cho học, education, better life, cho con đồng, better future for community, con đoàn, Victoria. Vietnamese, Viet, know about political will. It is not from government, but con đoàn, community. And this piece is called I Dream. Tôi mơ. Tôi mơ, I dreamed that I was born a dragon with clipped wings, a chimera reduced to ephemera, my scales removed, replaced with paper and stamps, packaged into a person, a paper person, to enter the dream called English. Tôi mơ that I could throw my voice above the ding of Footscray traffic to chip a pebble off Mont Blanc that would skip and skim upon Walden Pond. Tôi mơ that Thoreau was my father, and my ma would stop insisting that I master marital arts. Come cook, else you'll eat scrap paper all your life. Ink is not a sauce. Tôi, lost in translation. To mơ means you dine with ghosts, demons, nightmares of childhood, escapes through dense forests where you cannot mistake landmines for weeds, else dreams blow up in your face and you become the girl in the picture everyone recognizes as just a casualty of war. Tôi mơ that writers were ahistorical. Tôi mơ that the past once written would stay on the page and petrified. To mơ is to take poetic license as a Vietnamese woman, unrecognized in a language where there was no tôi without reference to others until the 1930s, and no equivalent you or vu to sustain tôi as an individual. Walt Whitman did not conceive the Song of Tôi in Vietnamese. Yet tôi, you, Vu readers, have granted me this page to become that which could not exist except in my mơ, within a mơ of my mother's tongue, remembered to sing this song of tôi.
Thank you, Anne. It's very touching and also joyful, I think. One of the rewards I find in advocacy work is the people you come across. And the next speaker, I've had the joy of meeting. His name's Jorge Hojera, and he's a former parent at FPS, of Footscray Primary School, and he's the current Maribyrnong councillor, newly elected. So congratulations and welcome, Jorge.
Welcome, everyone, as well, who've managed to get to this, I think, quite a beautiful event. I'd like to thank, first of all, Vicky and Anne for those great, well, inspiring words. I suppose the most important story for me to tell is about our family and our journey with Footscray Primary. Our association with Footscray Primary goes back to, if I remember rightly, 2006, when our eldest son, Miguel, started prep there, and in fact was one of the first children not from a Vietnamese background to start in the bilingual program. Both he and his brother Inti grew their learning, I should say, through the experience of the program and its impact on the whole school community. I don't think it would be any exaggeration to say that the program had a significant impact on the worldview of our two children, their understanding of the interconnectedness of people, place, ideas, their solidarity with communities elsewhere. In a word, I think their global citizenry. We're extremely grateful as a family for this experience and the fantastic work of the teachers at Footscray Primary, teachers such as Ko Chow, Ko Han, and numerous others who played such a beautiful role, I think, in the upbringing, actually, not just the education, but in the upbringing of our children. As part of our experience as a family at Footscray Primary, I spent, I think, roughly about 7 years on the Footscray Primary School Council, and a couple of those, maybe a few of those, as the council president. In that time, as you'd expect in a school, in a changing place, as Footscray has been, especially over the last sort of decade and a bit, in that time we faced a lot of challenges as a school, including questioning of the viability and the relevance of the bilingual program. In fact, really, with every new wave of families, there were those amongst them that assumed that such a program was a distraction from the real learning, in inverted commas. But at the same time, there were those families who came to the school especially because of the program, valuing what it added to the learning and the growing experience of their children. In fact, we had numerous families who came at that time when the school wasn't zoned from, actually from all over Melbourne, including some who would travelled quite a way for their children to experience the Vietnamese bilingual program at Footscray Primary. The FPS Council, teachers and the school leadership had to work consistently, certainly through all the years that we were there, to develop an understanding of the educational value of bilingual learning. It's not something that just happens or happen automatically. And I think, personally, I think this is entirely understandable in the context of the backwardness of the Australian education system in regard to language. And all the more so, I think, in the context of 2 decades or so of so-called educational reforms in this country, which have progressively strangled curriculum and narrowed, in my opinion, quite massively narrowed classroom pedagogy. Of course, these reforms have not played out uniformly, but rather have been, I think, especially in my experience as a primary school teacher for the time I did that as my work, these reforms have been most stringently, I think, imposed on public schools in the suburbs, especially in a lot of the sort of working class heartlands. Private schools and public schools in better resource neighbourhoods have sometimes managed, not always, but I think they sometimes have managed to retain a certain diversity of curriculum and special programs, including quite rich language programs, probably more often than not in European language, but nevertheless some rich language programs. I think for me in this context, and for our family in this context, FPS's Vietnamese bilingual program, embedded as it was in the International Baccalaureate Primary Years curriculum, provided a real beacon for many years, a real beacon, an example of rich integrated curriculum in a socially diverse school. So the closure of this program is not only a hurt for the Vietnamese community, but also a blow to all families interested in a meaningful education for their children in the western suburbs of Melbourne. It's a major shame in my mind that FPS chose to hear only the voices of opposition to the program. And despite the, what was it, I think 17,000 plus petitioners, numerous press and academic articles, some very beautiful articles amongst them, and the protests of families, not only inside the school, but throughout Footscray, the Footscray community, the school, on top of it all, picked the year of COVID and online learning to end a program that had over 2 decades of history. I was recently, as Hong referred to, I was recently elected to Maribyrnong Council, and I'm proud to say that the first motion I moved on council was in support of re-establishing a Vietnamese bilingual program in Melbourne's West. It was unanimously passed, and we're now pursuing the possibility of Brimbank Council, the other important council out in the western suburbs, passing a similar motion and helping VietSpeak increase the pressure on the education department. I'm really hopeful that VietSpeak can help build a community of support for the re-establishment of a Vietnamese bilingual program, at least in one primary school in the western suburbs of Melbourne. And I really hope that we can all be part of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Jorge. Yeah, so Jorge's been working really hard, as said, politically, as well as grassroots with community. And yeah, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Hoang Tran Nguyen, or in some parts of the world, it would be Nguyen Tran Hoang. And I'm also a parent at Footscray Primary, and first participated in advocating for the Vietnamese bilingual program in 2016 when the then principal discontinued the program without community consultation. And since then, I've heard other parents describe the program as having had 1,000 deaths over the years. And that speaks a bit to what Jorge's saying. What's been helpful for me is that through the advocacy, I've come to understand how important language is to community in a place like Footscray. And I'd also say in Australia more broadly. So this was really evident in the kinds of responses to Tony Boyd's petition to save the program from August this year. So Tony's joined us today, and he's also a parent at FPS. And in this petition, there were really some really moving and insightful comments, and I'll quote partly from one of them, who's from a local resident, Dr. Marie Party, who's also joined us. So I'll start, quote, "By saying we can't find an appropriately qualified Vietnamese teacher is what has been said to women, Indigenous people, and members of many minority groups forever. It is time to stop this," unquote. So many of you know the campaign to save the Vietnamese bilingual program at FPS did not alter the school's decision to end the program in April this year. And thus VietSpeak was initiated by parents, teachers, academics, and community members as a response to this situation. And many of these members have a long association with the FPS program, which has roots as a mother tongue program in 1985. So this 35-year history is partly what I suspect people are responding to in their support of the program. And it represents what language means to place. It represents how language is deeply connected to culture. And it demonstrates a respect and recognition that these values are to be nurtured and protected. So VietSpeak takes the form of grassroots advocacy that's well practiced in the western suburbs of Melbourne. And in fact, in my time at Footscray Primary, I met a parent who used to live next door to the former home of a man named William Cooper on Southampton Street. And some of you might know that Mr. Cooper's one of his lasting legacies takes the form of solidarity across cultures. And this is what I've also found really helpful doing this advocacy work, in that the kinds of solidarity between the Vietnamese and the non-Vietnamese who are willing to contribute their time and labors toward a set of shared ideas. And so for VietSpeak, this vision, these ideas take the form of nurturing the education and practice of the Vietnamese language for future generations in Melbourne's West. And so our first priority is to establish a Vietnamese bilingual program in a primary school in the area, and we'll collaborate with the many stakeholders to achieve this goal. But equally important for VietSpeak is to foster community, to foster one community language means to be in solidarity with other community languages. And so we recognize that Vietnamese as a language is not alone in being neglected from decades of any kind of meaningful support. And so I'm just echoing what previous presenters have spoken to. So in launching our advocacy group, VietSpeak invites all of you, as well as the broader community, to help us work towards celebrating the multilingual reality of our communities. And we ask you to join us in addressing the much needed changes in policy and practice for language education. And with that, I'll now share with you some video testimonies from alumni, student and teachers.
Hi everyone, my name is Celia Tran and I'm an alumni of Footscray Primary School, and I graduated a very long time ago. I'm actually one of the benefactors of a really fantastic program called the Vietnamese Bilingual Program. As a child of Vietnamese refugees, the program really helped me maintain my language, my culture, my identity, and be proud of where I've come from. My early memories of the program it was fun. It was a great learning experience, and I got to share my culture with my peers who didn't necessarily come from the same background. The reason why I'm really passionate about this cause and why I'm involved in this cause is because I really have benefited so much from it, and my peers have also too, from all walks of their life, not necessarily from Vietnamese background. I've got to learn a lot about the Vietnamese diaspora, about our culture, history, but also, as I said, be able to share with my peers who grew up in Footscray and surrounds about the importance of coming from bilingual heritage, from dual heritage. I think this cause is important for everyone, not just for the Vietnamese community. I think anybody and everybody who cares about education, who cares about culture, who cares about refugees, who cares about history, and maintaining the beauty and essence of the western suburbs and Footscray should join the campaign. The risk of Footscray developing so quickly is gentrification, and the risk of that is losing a significant part of Footscray's history. The language, Vietnamese, is relevant. It's the second most spoken language in the area. Keeping it is only common sense. We're in the Asian era, the Asian century. Having your child learn the language is way more beneficial than learning an Italian language, for instance. Also, I think the most wonderful part about the program is getting your children to understand and learn about, the collective promotion of learning about different cultures and the understanding of different cultures. I think that's the best thing for children, to get them to be exposed to different cultures, and one that is relevant to, the region and to the diaspora. So get behind it, support it. We call on your support. Everybody and anybody who cares about Footscray, the Western Suburbs, please join us in this fight to save the Footscray Primary School bilingual program.
I'm Liz Murray, and I am a bilingual educator and have been for the last 20 years. I first came across the program, the Vietnamese bilingual program at Footscray Primary School in 2001, 2002, when I was a relief teacher in Melbourne's West. And what I loved about the program is it had Vietnamese for Vietnamese home language speakers, as well as Vietnamese for non-home language Vietnamese speakers. And I felt that this was a program, this is the model, this is bilingual education as it should be, and as it should be as a human right. And so when I read about the program being ended, I was devastated. I felt that this is it's a loss, it's a disrespect to the community. Vietnamese community is extremely important in Australia, as is the Vietnamese language. And so to not have, to end the only Vietnamese bilingual program in the country, I feel is very short-sighted. So we are working together, and I'm willing to work together to ensure that there is Vietnamese bilingual education in Melbourne, potentially further out as well, to recognize the critical role that Vietnamese plays in Australian society.
My name is Chao Kong, and I was the bilingual program coordinator at Footscray Primary School from 2003 to 2018. Over the years at Footscray Primary School, I try to build up a strong language program, and I have worked with many young Vietnamese teachers who were as passionate as myself about teaching language to students. My background also involving a research master at Melbourne Uni, where I did a research on the assessment of bilingual students. So from my research, I built up a structured program where we can measure the progress of all students in the school, how they learn language in the school. And that evaluation structured program has been adapted in many other bilingual schools across the state, not just at Footscray Primary School. I joined this course because, first of all, I am Vietnamese, and I would like to support to have a Vietnamese program at a primary school. Also, I would think that to have a primary school to take on board our suggestion. I think we need to offer a very structured program, not just for Vietnamese background students, but for all students in the area, because a bilingual program has to be offered to all students. The benefit of learning bilingually is for all students. So that is what I think we should do.
Mhm.
So thank you to our alumni presenters that were pre-recorded. And also thank you to the translator who offered his services in kind for the subtitling. I'd like to next introduce Andre Dow, who's a writer that's been shortlisted for the Premier's Literary Awards and who's also a local parent. Andre Dow has managed to join us, but I think his internet connection's a bit shaky, so we've done a pre-recorded message.
Thanks for having me at the launch of this really important campaign. I come to this issue as a local parent of preschool children. We live just down the road from Footscray Primary, and when we first moved in, I was really excited to find out that the school had a Vietnamese bilingual program. It immediately made me think of my own childhood and schooling, which involved basically no formal Vietnamese learning at all. At the time, I felt rather ashamed of being Vietnamese. I remember my parents being told that I was speaking too much Vietnamese at kinder, and that I should be focusing on English instead, and later on, asking my parents not to speak to me in Vietnamese at the school gates. Now, as an adult, my spoken Vietnamese is very basic, and my reading and writing skills are non-existent. It's been a slow process of realizing what a loss this has been for me, a feeling of being cut off from my own history and my own family. So finding out about the bilingual program seemed like an opportunity to repair some of this damage, so that my children might be able to connect with their grandparents, with their extended families scattered around the world. I was excited and proud to be part of a community that celebrated a language like Vietnamese, a language that reflected local history, and most importantly, a language that is very much alive in the surrounding suburb. On a personal level, the loss of the program has been a real blow. It's made me wonder once again about the place of non-European languages and cultures in this city, even in a place that is so celebrated for its multiculturalism as Footscray. As I researched for my article in the Monthly, I found out how much thought and time and passion had gone into making the program a success. Despite what the department seems to think, I really discovered that a bilingual program isn't something that you can just start and stop at the whim of policymakers. It takes a community to make a bilingual program thrive, and it takes a lot of care on the part of school leaders too. It's much more than something that's just about formal academic outcomes. I think this campaign is about more than a single school or a single language. At its heart, this campaign, in a small but significant way, is trying to change Australia's relationship to language education and to Asia more broadly. As I wrote about in my article for the Monthly, there is a prevailing attitude that sees language education as a commodity, as something that students can trade for prestige or global mobility. And for that reason, so-called high-prestige languages, which are almost all European languages, are favoured over so-called community languages, like Vietnamese. But that privileging of European languages willfully ignores the reality that Australia has an important and thriving non-European population, especially here in the western suburbs. As a local parent, I want my children's learning to reflect the actual diversity and community they are growing up in. I want them to feel that their cultural background is something to celebrate. I hope that the proposed Vietnamese LOIT program at Footscray of 2 hours a week can do some of that. But even more, I hope that the department and the school realise what a resource they have in the passion this campaign has shown for a properly bilingual program in Vietnamese. It's exactly this sort of community support that makes a bilingual program a success. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Andre. So Andre and Vicky and others have joined us today, and so after we finish with the formal presentations, there'll be a Q&A. So yeah, if you have questions, there'll be an opportunity to ask our presenters. Next, I'd like to introduce Professor Joseph Lobianco, who is from the Melbourne Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne, and who also authored Australia's first comprehensive national language policy. Joe's currently on the road, so he's made a pre-recorded video for us too.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's very nice to be part of this activity, and I wish everyone good luck in the efforts to redress the problems and injustices in relation to the lack of provision of Vietnamese language support. I prepared a little outline, which I think people will be able to see. I just wanted to make a few comments about what the ideas behind this are. And if I can plug into the live performance on Saturday, the live seminar, then I'll be very happy to answer questions. But otherwise, I'm at least pleased that Huang's given me this opportunity to have some direct input to you. Okay, I think that one of the most important things that can be done is to devise a way to understand and to share understanding of what the best way to maintain a vibrant Vietnamese language presence and vitality, I mean linguistic vitality, in the western suburbs of Melbourne. I think this is important because we, through research, know really well what gives languages life. This is something that we didn't used to know very well. Community languages are not like, say, a foreign language that's taught in the school system, that's only encountered by students in the school system. A community language is a social practice that's alive in the community, that people use in homes, that they identify with, that's part of their cultural makeup, and which is enacted in families, in conversations across generations. That means that what we aspire to in teaching community languages is different from teaching foreign languages. The purposes are different. What we need to do for community languages is to act both in the home and the community, and I'll call that the home, but I mean the community as well, and in school. What happens in home is informal transmission. And that's actually a technical term which we mean the naturalized use of the language in which the child doesn't feel like he or she is learning, they're actually using what they know. It's quite a different thing from formal transmission, which happens in schools, where you are explicitly being taught something. Now, informal transmission doesn't convey educated speech. So when students learn a language at school, they learn formal transmission, meaning they mostly get a literate form of the language, and it's adapted to learning geography, learning history. In other words, it's used in academic contexts. And at home, it's used basically to manage life, to get through the day, to get your mum or dad to do something for you, whatever activity is involved. And a community language really needs to do both, whether it's an Australian Aboriginal language or an immigrant language. They need to be supported in communities, and this supporting communities needs to be backed up in the formal education system. You can keep a language alive quite well. There are many examples in the world without school systems really helping. But that requires a lot of community effort and resources. And it tends to happen when a language is really being attacked by a wider community or oppressed. you know, there are many examples in the world where this happens, but mostly languages don't survive these environments and people get assimilated linguistically. So these are all possibilities, and Australia has lost many languages. We know, well, they're not lost, of course, that's a bad way to express the problem. There's been language oppression, especially of Aboriginal Australian languages, as I think we should call them Australian languages. And so fewer and fewer young people speak them. More and more, they speak either forms of Creole or English only. And so in those cases, what's involved is both teaching and revitalization. And it doesn't just happen in schools. Schools only serve things that are going on in the community. So in the little paper I wrote, I talk about having a vision for Vietnamese in the western suburbs of Melbourne, which must interact with Vietnamese in other parts of Australia and the other languages in the region. So a multilingual vision of interacting communication, and I call it a hub and a home. And the home refers to the presence in the community and in the actual home, the families, and in the hub, in the school system. And in the school system, what should happen is the 2 hours or whatever will remain at Footscray Primary School needs to be linked to other sites where preschool and school and secondary school, so that there can be what we call articulation. That is that the sites where the language is taught and can be promoted must be found to interact with each other. And to do that, I think the community needs a person who's going to be not attached to the school as the teacher, but that can go and support this. It doesn't have to be a full-time position, but I think it's worth asking government for that support to establish a network of provision, which is educated Vietnamese language education around, you know, literate use of the language, both for Vietnamese background children and other children who want to learn the language. So it would be differentiated. It would be mother tongue development for kids who have it at home and second language learning for children who are learning it for the first time. And that is the hub, has to all interact with the home, meaning both the community and the families where the Vietnamese language is present as a cultural an extension of home culture. And that also needs a person responsible for this. And again, that doesn't have to be a full-time person, but it needs to be someone who understands language learning processes so that we can link the informal learning that's done at home to usage. Usage is, again, it's actually a technical word that we mean the actual usage where your focus is not on learning. The conscious attention of a child involved in use is on getting things done. You know, getting this from my mum and dad, or getting my bike, or whatever actual activity they're doing, the activity has to be the focus, not the language. And the language is learned naturalistically like this. In other words, it's living, it's part of doing things in the world. And in the school, the focus, of course, is on learning. Although in bilingual programs, it goes a bit beyond that because it's also being used to learn subjects. And so the focus is a little bit on using it as well. But in general, there is a difference between these two things. So I think that at the very least in the first year, we should aim to have a person who can assist the extension of the program beyond Footscray Primary School into other schools that will host programs in Vietnamese and link them together. And then the link into the home. And the home will be activities of usage. So it'll be weekend, it'll be immersion, it'll be camps, all of these kinds of things where children will, through sport, cultural activities, painting, whatever, cooking, whatever things we actually do, they're using the language to get those things done, so that the message is that the language is a living part of being a young Australian child of Vietnamese background or or learning the language as a non-Vietnamese background child. So, you know, it's there's a mountain of research that's gone into this way to understand things, from different influences in sociology, anthropology, pedagogy, but put most succinctly, I think it comes down to this: finding, we can't rely on schools to save languages. They don't do that. In fact, schools sometimes don't help. You know, sometimes schools expose the power hierarchy between languages too clearly. And we need to keep in mind that young kids really want to belong to their peer group. And if they're part of peer groups where their home language is not valued in the school, then the message to them is actually one of being pushed away from the language, and they become reluctant to use it, to identify with it. This is a very big problem, and it's especially around adolescence, when kids get to about 12, 13, 14, that efforts to maintain languages at home become really hard. And parents sometimes get very frustrated there, but we know from the research on this how to manage these processes. But that's a really important thing. We can't rely on the school alone. If families and the community don't play their role, then I think the task of doing it in the school becomes too hard. It then becomes just a foreign language, really. Even though it might be spoken somewhere in the community, it's not used in the home, so it's still not a language of natural speech to the kids. So they're all important things. I think it's very important to put pressure on government to expand and support Vietnamese, not just around a particular school, but around a precinct, to make it a living, active part of the identity of the western suburbs of Melbourne. So I hope those comments are of interest. I express my support for your efforts, and I'm happy to keep cooperating to what I hope is a good end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I think we'll move on now to, that concludes our formal presentations, and I'd like just to take everyone through the website that we're launching today as well, and just so everyone's familiar with David, are you able to bring up the website? So David Tran has been the Zoom master for us for this event, so thank you, David. So this is the website that we've put together as the kind of interface, really, for the group to the broader community. And so we've got our vision, which some of our presenters have touched on and which Joe has elaborated on a little bit. And we'll continue working with people like Joe to develop, you know, proposals that we can take to different stakeholders. We've got a section that is a summary of comments that was garnered from the petition that Tony Boyd started. And if you take a bit of time to spend with those comments, it's, yeah, it paints a particular story of how community values language and how the community was seeing the, I guess, the narrative play out in the school's discontinuation of the program. And we've got a section on media coverage of the campaign, not just this year, although this year was quite a lot of attention, but for previous years as well. So there's a really beautiful picture of Tony and his family, his wife Hao and their 3 kids. So in that section, there are interviews, radio interviews, podcasts, mainstream media, as well as local media. The next section is on just testimonials. So this website is a work in progress, in a sense that it's something that, as it's an interface with the community, we'll be building it, you know, as we go. So at the moment, there are testimonials from Kotyou and Jorge, and we'll slowly include some of our video testimonials, and we'll continue collecting more as well. The next section is our acknowledgement to country, and again, just an introduction to Vicky's work and the Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages, as well as Vicky's project that was started by her dad in, I guess, reinvigorating languages of Western Melbourne or Western Victoria. There are two sections that I'd like to just, you know, focus on. One is our fundraising campaign, the GoFundMe campaign. So if you click onto that, it will take you to our GoFundMe campaign. And I guess it's really important to raise this. It's never really fun to talk about money, but it's also really important to talk about it, because although we're a group of, you know, really dedicated volunteers, we can't always rely on in-kind support, and so there are costs. So it's really important to share amongst your networks, press the donate button. You can choose to be anonymous. You can choose to donate whatever amount you're comfortable with. Every little bit counts. So yeah, so that's a really important new initiative for us. We've had really great support so far with it. And the next section I'd like to also just take you to is the support us section, which is a really important, I guess, interface for us with the broader community. So in this, there's our subscription mailing list that you can subscribe to. But I think what's really important in this section is the volunteers section. And so we're on the lookout for people with different skill sets. So within our current group, yeah, like I think we've got a really good mix, but we're also needing people with certain skill sets. So you can scroll down and choose one. And if you don't feel like one of them's your thing, just pick one and maybe leave some comments over there. But it's really important for us to understand, I guess, where you're coming from, and it's to help us streamline that process. And I guess down the bottom with our footers, there's also links to our Facebook group, our Twitter account, all the required social outlets, and we also have put in there the Medium page that from the previous FPS campaign. So that Medium page has a few articles that detail. Well, we can start with the open letter to the minister. I guess one of my interesting things for me with the open letter is just the disparate cohorts of people that, you know, joined on to the letter. And we've got an article that, you know, unpacks all the arguments and the background that led to the ending of the program. Yeah. So yeah, after today, if you've got time, have a look through our website. I think we're pretty proud of it. So yeah, spend time with it. And that pretty much concludes our end of the event. Well done to all the presenters. Thank you everyone for joining us. And now's a really important part of the event as well, our Q&A session. So if you've got questions, I think I'm just going to look at the chat function, but maybe we'll just do it live if there isn't any on the chat function. So if there are people with questions for Vicky or Jorge or other presenters, even for Van, whose mural has been pretty visible for us. It strikes a really true message for us. Yeah. Any hands up?
John, you were saying something about GitHub. What is GitHub? Is the site in GitHub?
Sorry, I was on mute. So GitHub is a place where you can create repositories that many people can then interact with. They can you can clone a repository, make edits, and then you can basically push your changes back into the repository. And it's commonly used for large-scale code base, well, just code bases in general. And you can then set up automatic deployment of those code bases into web servers like AWS or whatever. But I think, Huang, this is used. This uses a mark. I need background noise. It looks like this was actually built with a website service instead of sort of a bare bones code base that then gets deployed. So it's probably not using GitHub.
Okay. Is that something used for language like collection? Can you
you can use it for anything. So people use it to write, research papers, joint research papers or, we use it for code, for web applications, websites, things of that sort. But it allows it allows collaboration.
Oh, okay.
And
okay.
So that's why I was asking.
Okay. Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it's like websites are really interesting interfaces, is what I've found. And there's always something to learn. Marie, did you have a hand up?
I've just unmuted myself. Thanks, Huang. Thanks also, Vicky, and for all the contributors. It's a really terrific launch, so congratulations on all your work. And as well as being a terrific launch, it was just a wonderful meeting to be part of. So, so thank you for all of that. And you've just given us all this information about the website, so there's lots of things we can do. I just was very moved by the progress of the meeting into finishing with Joe, and Joe's very kind of practical approaches to how to advance, or possibilities for thinking about how to advance. I mean, he had a framework, but he also had some practical things. And so I was just really going to ask you about how it advances from here. I mean, I'm appreciative of the move by Maribyrnong City Council to bring Brimbank together, and also understand that Joe's propositions would require some funding from government and so on in order to make that work. So it's just really it's just really like a bit sort of like, what are your plans, or should I say, what are our plans as a community? So,
does someone from the group want to start answering that? Thanks, Kath. Good luck with that. Yeah.
So I think it's just a very open process at this point. I think of the concept of co-creating. Everyone's kind of come, and this is our launch to ask people to be a part of that process. So while Jorge, we have to do some technical council things, and then we'll be doing a lot of research and development about what kind of program we can forward. And, once the councils adapt the motion, our team of research and development would be thinking about that very question, Mari. So it'd be great to have more people, the better input on it.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else from the group want to add anything to that?
Hey Juan, I'm not sure you guys can hear me. Well, I'm just outside, so there might be some background. But I should add that in the very short to medium term, if there are any people out there who are parents of school-aged children in the western suburbs area, particularly around Sunshine, which is where we're primarily looking for candidate primary schools, do join your school council, because ultimately what we found is it's critically important to have principals as well as
The wind is really bad, Brendan.
Oh, sorry. Maybe I'll just type it and you can read it off. Or you can just talk about the school council, how important that is.
Yes, it is really important to have a seat at the table, as Brendan is saying, and yeah, so that's a really big lesson. I think for the campaign, yeah, and in terms of the practical question, Marie, we're actually meeting with some educators, including Kodjo, as well as some in the group next week, to start to devise the practical things, like what does a program look like? You know, where do the teachers come from? So those things, and like we have collected some of that data throughout this year, and now it's about, you know, consolidating the knowledge of past bilingual teachers, consolidating, you know, data, you know, linking people together, and so once we have like a draft of that, we'll go back to people like Joe and other sort of kinds of specialists. Yeah, and if anyone here today is interested in that aspect, in terms of, you know, educational advocacy and building what a community language program looks like, yeah, you're welcome to join us.
And
I'm a novice, so
yeah. No, I think also to link with Vicky and the other efforts in other communities, that's really, so we're a bit of a pilot and in this launch, and we're going to be learning from Vicky and all the generations of work that have come before us, but also then thinking about other community language programs that are at risk. So we want to become some kind of a model of how advocacy and research can support them. And so we would be going for that outcome as a larger vision for Australia. Kind of what Joe is saying is kind of thinking, I think he speaks really well in terms of like an environment, you know, that is central, and it begins with the community language. And then building those environments is kind of what needs to happen.
Yeah, I agree, Anne. I think that there are certainly, as allies, like we were talking about, working together and collaborating and supporting and learning from each other. You know, I put a little thing up there because back in the 80s in Geelong, we used to just take our kids out of school because there was no cultural studies, there was no Indigenous content, there was nothing. So we just went and started taking them out of the schools and having an afternoon a week, and the education department were like freaked out. So they ended up giving us a room because we were using our own resources at a community centre. And I mean, obviously it didn't last forever, but it did kind of freaked them out enough that they were trying to provide some support. But in the end, we didn't carry on for forever. It's still not going. But I know Hwang spoke to me about a house of language, you know, community house of language where all our languages could live. And, you know, like I said, VACL, that's our goal. And I think that there's lots of opportunities there for us to work together.
Yeah, just on Vicky's, yeah, like Vicky and I almost staged an event early this year before COVID struck. So art is a really important aspect of this kind of work, and which is why it was really great to have Arne's work and poetry. And Tony, are you still with us? Did you have any thoughts as well?
Hello.
Hi, Tony.
Hi.
So Tony's a parent at the school, and yeah, he started the petition.
Hi. I'm a parent at the Footray Primary School, and it's a good chance for me to know Mr. Hoàng and everybody. The first time when I come to school, I will really love this school because it offers a Vietnamese program. Unfortunately, when the school stopped the program, I'm really upset. And I think the Vietnamese program very useful, not only for the Vietnamese children to connect their parents or grandparents. I see another side that in the future, when the children grow up and it have another language, it can have children to have a better job. And in business, I am a businessman. I do the international business between Australia and other countries, especially Vietnam. I see that if I can use two languages, it's very good for my business because I can work with everyone with Vietnamese and other people in English. So that's why I support a lot to the Vietnamese bilingual program. My idea that we have children, not only Vietnamese children, we can have other children. Australia is a multicultural country. That's why it have a good chance for people can speak more than one language. So I support strongly to Hoàng, and I will follow up our campaign in long term. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Tony said before that he's not a public person, so it's quite a real big thing for him to do what he's been doing for the campaign. And you know, like I've actually heard him on radio, and like I think he's like an amazing speaker. So thank you, Tony. Rosales, did you want to say anything? Did you have any thoughts about today's event or questions?
Oh, thank you. I think it's fantastic. The fact that all of you come together in a very organic manner to organize something that is extremely important, you know, for the benefit of your children, but also, I guess, the stories that are in between. I was very, you know, I can see that the great diversity is not only in terms of language, but is the way that people position themselves within, you know, a new country, you know, this country that has also embraced me, and I'm very happy to be here working for the Aboriginal community. Now, in terms of frameworks, I guess, I think that when things are done in a horizontal manner, they tend to work better than when things are done on a vertical manner. And I think that we have many examples of that, language programs being highly successful because every person owns it and every person has a different level of input. I think that the great diversity of languages is rich when people have a number of initiatives. They are enormous expectations for the schools to do quite a lot of work, discipline children, etc. I am also a mother of a child who is multilingual, and I think that you know, he was born in New Zealand, and I realized very rapidly that mainstream Pakeha culture was going to provide the English skills needed, but I needed to foster additional languages for his own benefit. And I took responsibility for that, for, you know, to teach my own child in a different language. And again, I think that still it was a privilege, because a privilege to, that cannot compare to the languages that are in process of revitalization. In Australia, many languages come to be dormant sometimes, as you know, we address the languages here at the Victoria Aboriginal community. So these languages require extensive work. So I think it's extremely important for us newcomers into this country to recognize that yes, our languages are very important, because, you know, for me to pass on to my son and so forth. And yet I think the languages of First Peoples, they occupy a very special place in the spectrum of language and the needs that languages have in this country. So I think there is a mutual learning that we need to do. There is an enormous work that our communities need to understand. And I am very happy to join into this campaign, because I think it's going to be, it's always going to be, you know, a two-side learning, learning about what are our commonalities, but also the very specificity of our needs. So yeah. We are here and we are very supportive of your efforts. And also we are very supportive in terms of sharing what we can share, you know, from First Peoples languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosales.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosales. Carol, did you have a hand up before? Yep. Please unmute.
Okay. All right, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, the panel, for delivering such a wonderful and informative session today. I myself a language teacher. So I've been teaching Vietnamese at Footscray Primary School, and also I've been teaching Japanese at other schools as well, and this is my experience. From the perspective of school principals, most of them think about enrollments. So it's the lifeblood of the school and the community. So the higher the enrollments are, the more funding the schools get. So they view the language program as something to attract enrollments. So I feel like with a language like Vietnamese, it doesn't sell as well as, like, let's say, a popular language like Japanese, because I find myself ending up teaching my third language, which is Japanese, at other schools, and I didn't have much choices. I didn't get employment at Footscray Primary School after just a short contract. And I realized that if the school principals think that the language will attract enrollments, then they will support it. Most decisions come from the very top. If it doesn't get the support from the principals, it's very unlikely that the program will become successful. So in a way, for us to think of promoting a language program, it should be at a place where there's a high level of community representative in the area. And also it's important for the school councils to be highly representative of people who support the language programs.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, it all comes back to funding. So enrollments are the keys to get the funding and the budget. And they just use the language program as a way to advertise for the school image and also just to get the extra enrollment. So that's what my experience is in terms of being a language teacher so far.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Jorge, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wouldn't mind following up a little bit on some of the questions and issues raised around practical steps going forward. Look, I think ideally such a rich conversation as has gone on today should be part of the conversations that have been going on now for over, well over 5 years around the Footscray Learning Precinct. However, they're not, and are not likely to be in the short term, in my opinion. I was involved on the school council of Footscray High as well when the conversations around the precinct were at the sort of probably a bit of a critical turning point. In one of the driving forces of the Footscray Learning Precinct was Marsha Thompson, an ex-Labor local member, and she was on our school council at the time. So we were able to have these, we were part of these conversations around the precinct, and some of the results of those conversations include, well, not necessarily the results, but they bound up in the conversation, I should say, include the loss of Vietnamese and Spanish at Footscray High around this time, and parallel to that of Vietnamese at Victoria University. So it was in pretty short time, over a few years, the way the conversation formed around languages for Footscray Learning Precinct doesn't really matter, how you explain exact causes, but the reality is that the conversation that formed excluded Vietnamese from the project around the precinct. And that's now sort of embedded by some practical decisions that will not be reversed quickly. Certainly, for example, the reintroduction of Vietnamese at Victoria University, I don't see that happening in short term. And likewise, I don't see the reintroduction of Vietnamese or Spanish for that matter, which is ironic given that Spanish has been introduced at a number of other local primary schools. But anyway, I don't see that being reversed either at Footscray High. And this is bound up with not only the early vision around the precinct political vision, but also some of the gentrification patterns, demands, and so forth around the Footscray area. So look, without going into, there's whys and hows and so forth, but I think the reality is that in practical terms, and I think Brendan mentioned this before in the discussion, one of the things I think we definitely need to do is really target the Sunshine area if we want to move, in a shorter rather longer period of time towards the re-establishment of a bilingual or duolingual program. And it makes sense demographically too, and it ties into what was being said before by Carol too about, the marketability of a language, because obviously, Vietnamese in Sunshine, or at least in most of Sunshine, I think is the second most spoken language outside of English. So demographically, of course, it makes sense. That's not to exclude, hopefully, the approach, the broader approach that Joe spoke about. I think that's important. But I think it's also important that, we try to keep pushing forward on re-establishing this program. And I think one of the key aspects of that now is, okay, we've moved motions at councils. We'll hopefully sit down again with Katie Hall and blah, blah, blah. But I actually think a really important thing now is trying to win over a principal or two, because there is quite a lot of room for principals to take decisive action around things like this. And I personally think it's more likely to come from a principal who understands the arguments, who's passionate about language, who who believes in what we're doing, I think it's more likely if we find a principal like that, that things will move quicker than trying to push bit at a time through the bureaucracy of the department, which, as someone else has said before in these conversations, I think Joe himself mentioned it, it can take a long time. It's easy for the department to slash or axe a language program. It can take a long time to, you know, to get one going. So I think finding a principal, a school, is a real priority.
Thanks, Jorge. Now we've reached 90 minutes, so I might just take this time to allow people who may not be as you know, interested in the sort of like the nuts and bolts of the conversation. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank those people for joining us. But also, I think if there's still questions around these, you know, practical steps, then if people are happy to continue. Yeah, Lou, did you want to?
Yeah, I think there's a theme emerging that Maury and I researched as educational sociologists that I just want to draw out from underlying to surface. It has a lot to do with what was called the horizontal works better than the vertical. If we understand the history of schooling in Australia, where for a while it wasn't so important to where people went. There were working class jobs that didn't require schooling to get to them. And then the society started to stratify, you know, significantly sometime in the 1980s. And it became, schooling increasingly becomes then the passport system for who goes where in an increasingly unequal social structure. And when that happens, schools, especially through their main message systems, curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment, start to sort and select based on who's in powerful positions in the social structure. And the more marginalized who attend the schools increasingly become liabilities, you know, to many of those principals, many of those managers, even in the schools that mostly have them as their population. I've witnessed this as a researcher. It's like they wish that they could have a transfusion of the students who go to the more elite schools coming into there so they could market them better. The marketing has been mentioned. And it narrows the curriculum impulse considerably towards the vertical, and policy drives that demand down from above into the schools and into the classrooms. So it seems to me that a major challenge is getting teachers pulled ethically towards the horizons, what's on the horizons of schools, the more marginal who don't have power over the schools, but to whom we owe ethical responsibility. To teachers to work in these projects with people from the community, people who have an activist connection to both community and an impulse towards schools, so that we can develop curriculum programs, pedagogical approaches, and and so on through actual projects that that make it possible for the value, the richness that comes from the the Vietnamese community, the indigenous community, and other communities to be made curricular, and for the teachers to start to care about that. I think it's the original impulse of becoming a teacher is that you care about that, but you become captured by an institutional competitive marketing incentive. And many teachers, it's not, we notice as people who have taught teachers that about half of the people who enter the teaching force leave after a few years because of disillusionment with all of that. So to get to the horizon, to get school working for the horizons and not for the vertical competition they're in, really it takes some kind of concrete projects that are educational, that are curricular, so of course the Vietnamese the Vietnamese English bilingual program is a curricular element. I think it needs to correct to the wider hub, or wider home community that Joe was talking about, also becoming curricular, so that it isn't just language, it's language connected to social cultural activities and things that teachers would care to be involved in, that families would want their kids involved in, that principals could be pushed to think horizontally rather than vertically upward, and so on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lou. Yeah, like all these really interesting conversations. Rosales, you've put something in the chat, but I saw your hand up before. You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, yeah. It was just a comment because a while ago I was assessing all the schools, the implementation of Aboriginal education in the schools in Queensland, and I visit many schools, and it was fascinating to see why some programs work and why some others were not working as well as all the inputs made, not only through policy making in Queensland, but also in terms of resource allocation. And I think I was very impressed to see how people in that area of Inala, they had an amazing, very inspiring library, as well as the participants and people who, the students who went to study in those locations. They were fluent in their languages, and as a consequence, they developed also culturally quite a lot of festivities. So it was a very culturally rich place, very inspiring. Also, as I said, many other languages were spoken in the area. So I was thinking maybe, your research team might like to link up with some of the people who have gone through that process already, and they might be interested to observe what they have done that was successful.
Mm.
Yep, that's all.
Thanks, Rosales. Yeah, I didn't know about the program in Nala, so that's a really good opportunity to learn.
Yeah. And, as a researcher, I just want to say that, research is slow and it only proves what's already reality, which is community and people. Vicky, you pulling out the kids and then getting the schools to really learn from that. You can always pull back on these structures. And I know we still have to work with them, principles and those kind of things. But I just believe research is always going to slow to the reality of what we can achieve as a community. So I really, really want to just commend people for coming today.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. I've been really enjoying it.
Thank you. Okay.
Maybe we'll leave it at that, Vicky. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Okay. See you
Thank
soon.
you. It's been wonderful.
See you all next time in 2021.
Yes. Okay.
Keep in touch.
Take care.
Thank you.